environmental justice groups stood on the sideline. Of course, the business took a strong opposed view, and it was vetoed. I have put that particular chief of staff there because some of the things, history tells us some things. You may recall that EJ Advocates had managed to convince and work with the chief of staff to include the language cumulative impacts as well as disadvantaged communities. But however, when the bill got signed, and at that podium, and they wanted the environmental justice, some of the environmental justice group representatives to be present during the signing ceremony, they refused to join because market-based mechanism may be included but still there in the final version of the bill. So the person never wanted to support anything regarding these groups. So the person prevailed and the bill got vetoed, though we had the support of the secretary as well as the chairman of the Air Resources Board. But by that time we had a wide recognition of this issue across the state. And during the November election, the assembly member had become a senator, and he, along with Assembly Member Manuel Perez, sponsored the bill again. And CRPE, that was Center on Race, Poverty, Environment, backed off being a sponsor. Instead, CEHAS, California's Environmental Justice Alliance, a coalition of 6 environmental justice groups came on board as a sponsor, along with Natural Resources Defense Council and Ella Baker Center. The support, which was only about 17 to 14, grew up to 34 to 11, and also eventually when the bill got passed after 2 years, it had grown up to the more than 60 to 70 groups. The bill, instead of being 1 year, it became a PON. It was a double referred. Some of the people who work with the legislature might know those things. And because of this issue, because of the author took a position of something different on a separate bill, it got caught up between the speaker and the senator's internal differences of opinion, and so it got into the sort of a code file for the, and became a 2-year bill. And one more senator joined, Senator Pavley, and 2 more assembly members joined as authors for the 3rd year. And then there was a compromise, and the bill, which had the review process, accountability, and all, got stripped, and basic 2 elements remained. That was formation of the funds to go, or the carve out of the funds, 25% and 10%, and also a broad definition of disadvantaged communities was included. And the bill gets signed, and that was the time I finished my fellowship and moved on to drawing unemployment. The lessons I learned is this bill was one of the answers in the context of climate justice whenever we think of pricing carbon, be it be a carbon tax, be it be cap and trade, or some other mechanism is used. And it's a mandate, and it has a money, and so we hope that it will keep going further because both are involved. It's not a policy, because a policy can change with the leadership. We learned that an extensive education and outreach was important, and gathering support at multiple levels was important. And here I want to say that we also did an extensive reach out even to the business and industry groups, which helped. In fact, towards the end, some of them, their tone of oppose had changed, and in fact, some of them actually became neutral. And I just want to say that words and actions have consequence. I told you about the chief of staff, and there were many such side stories which can be talked about some other time. And in order to bring about a step change, like the community benefit, like what happened, we always need to think out of the box, and it was a great gratifying journey for me and really a dream coming true. Thank you very much.
My presentation, hi, I'm Arsenio Mataka. I'm the Assistant Secretary for Environmental Justice at the California EPA. And while my presentation is loading, I'll say I'm here to talk today about CalVirusScreen, the tool that we created and Shankar set the foundation for in California to look at cumulative impacts. And again, I got here in 2011, and all this climate work was going on. I wasn't really interested in that. I was interested in figuring out a question that has burdened all of our communities, if you're from the EJ community, the question that everybody's been struggling with for decades. And this idea of cumulative impacts and what can we do to better get our arms around it to sort of remove these barriers in place to action. And so when I got here, all that foundation was laid, and we still had a report that was just a methodology in 2010. And I saw this as an opportunity to answer some of the questions that I, growing up in my own community, had. I come from a small farm worker community in California's Central Valley. And for those of you not familiar with California Central Valley, you know, there's tremendous environmental disparities. I can only explain my own, being that, you know, to this day, our houses, you know, have to go and get bottled water. There's 2 million people that don't have clean, safe drinking water in the state of California. A large part of them are in the Central Valley region. We were home at one time. I could look out at the back of my house to the largest tire pile in the world. At one time, we were burning 40 million tires a year, a few miles away from my house. And we also had 1 of 3 trash incinerators near our community. Couple that with tremendous ag industry and pesticide use in the community, as well as some of the worst here in the nation, and you got yourself a cumulative impact sort of story with not a lot of data. I come from a town of 500, not a lot of data to support what you're experiencing. So when I got here and I saw, you know, this methodology and, you know, I saw all this, you know, work, I said, we need to get this out, and we need to get this out quickly. So my initial plan was, let's get this out in 6 months, and this is my first government job, so everybody laughed. Everybody laughed. And, you know, they said, slow down. I said, yeah, you know what, we don't need to slow down, we need to go fast. And so I'm here to tell you about CalVirusScreen. It's the tool that was used to identify and prioritize these communities. Everybody with us, right? We have this cap and trade program. Shankar and all these good folks lined up this bill that carved out a quarter of the money generated from this cap and trade revenue source, and we're reinvesting it in what the legislature's coined disadvantaged communities. That's not our term. It's what they chose to call it. But if they're going to give us all this money, we'll call it, you know, whatever they want. And so this is CalVirusScreen. It's a broad snapshot, a picture of the 8,000 census tracts throughout California. It provides a relative ranking for these 2 things. Oh, let's skip one. Okay. It presents a relative ranking of one's pollution load, so your overall pollution burden, and a relative ranking of your vulnerability. And we'll get into that, what we're talking about there. But it's at the census tract level. This is CalVirusScreen 2.0. The first version was 1.0, and it was at zip code level. And the community told us, you gotta get down census tract level, so we did. This was some of the history that Shankar explained for many of you familiar with EJ, and, you know, a lot of the statutes came online in 99, 2000. But then, you know, it took us a while to get things going and get focused on this idea of cumulative impacts. And it's kind of hard to read this slide, but essentially what this just points out is it took a very long time to get this tool out. Here's the sort of model of CalVirusScreen. Again, to your left, or to your left, it's your burden of pollution. We sort of unpack that from exposures or potential exposures and environmental effects. Environmental effects is just all the stuff that's left over after the pollution has taken place. So your landfills, your hazardous waste generators and landfills, your impaired water bodies, your cleanup sites, all those things are environmental effects under this model. But then we also look at population characteristics. So we're looking at sensitive populations as well as the socioeconomic factors that we know exist in a lot of our communities. And I want to be clear about something, is that we're not just including these population characteristics because it's some statute that says we have to include socioeconomic factors or because we have to include sensitive populations. The document that we've laid out documents and documents the scientific literature to show that all of those indicators within those population characteristics do affect the way in which a person or a community deals with the pollution burden. And so all these indicators we're saying, affect it. So it's just not because we want to include these things. So to the left we have these exposure indicators. These are our 19 indicators. In California we have a lot of different places. So a lot of those exposure indicators are air quality, but then we also include things like drinking water as well as pesticides. The next column is the environmental effects, and those are the sort of degradation of the environment. And a large part we look at proximity to these sort of bad things in communities. Again, we look at sensitive populations, children, elderly, asthma rates, low birth weight, and then we look at educational attainment, linguistic isolation, poverty, and unemployment. And I don't have time, this is a big report, I don't have time to explain how we add this all up, but all these things get added up. So for instance, looking at ozone, we take the census tract with the worst ozone, put it at the top. The census tract with the least ozone, put it at the bottom. And we do that for every indicator, and we put it all together. This just talks about the challenges. I think the EPA is going through this with EJ Screen. How do you come up with criteria or indicators that represent a state or a nation? Obviously, different states have different type of data. In our state, different counties or areas have different type of data, so it's a challenge to find good data that is at a statewide level that's good quality. And this is just how it's built. When we add things up, if you're like in the 75th percentile, which we call in the inverse of that, the top 25%, that just means that you're worse off than 75% of the rest of the state. So here's an example of the traffic density indicator. It's a California data set. To nobody's surprise in LA, if you look at the dark areas, that's where the freeways are at. So, this is, and again, I also want to be clear about something else. All this work we're doing just affirms all the work that's been done for the last several decades from a lot of organizations throughout the nation and also for the state. This is just backing it up with science and data to make sure, and having the state own it. That these are the areas that need our help. And so this isn't going to be anything new to those people in LA who are talking about traffic density on those maps. Here's the cleanup sites. And as you can imagine, if you've ever been to LA, you know that those are communities of color, poor communities of color in LA. And here's an indicator. We look at not only just the number of cleanup sites, we actually try to weigh the burden of a particular cleanup site, and we've developed some sort of metrics for that. So here are the results. They're kind of hard to see. We have an online tool that has all this data, and it's interactive. You can click on any zip code to get all this, or census tract to get all this information. But again, this little area, this is Central Valley, is highly impacted. You can't see some of our urban areas. You do pick up in the Bay Area, as well as LA and other areas, and the red parts are high. Okay, I'm going to wrap it up already. This is LA. If you're familiar with the freight movement in Los Angeles, it goes like this, follows the red. So we think it's pretty accurate. We have all this information online. I want to be, and I know Charles just gave you the 1 minute, but this is really important, especially for the group that we're talking to. 2 minutes. You notice all those indicators didn't have race in it. And that's a big hit that we took from the beginning. I want to be clear that we've done tremendous analysis on the results as it relates to race. And so we've issued other documentation showing, and again, what we already know is that the color of your skin is still the best indicator of the pollution burden that you've experienced. And I could go on with these slides. Charles isn't going to let me go through them. But if you look lastly this is the top 10% percentile of California, the worst areas. The pink's Latinos, the yellow is African Americans, and the green is API, Asian Pacific Islander. If you're African American, don't be deceived by this number. Yeah, a lot of Latinos are affected, but in California, 1 in 4 African Americans live in a top 20% community. 1 in 3 every Latinos live in a top 20% community. And if the Asian Pacific Islander information was disaggregated, 1 in 4 Southeast Asians would be highly impacted. So again, looking at the 9s and the 10s, those were the figures I was giving. So if you look at those two, the top 2 deciles, you still have tremendous disparities, especially for Latinos and African Americans. And that's it. You can go online. This just explains what everybody's already talked about, that we have this 25% carve out. But again, this tool goes beyond this cap and trade mechanism. We're using it for enforcement, prioritizing enforcement. We're looking at other pots of money to get to these communities, whether it's bikeways, pathways, walkways, solar panels, and so we're using this tool for a lot of different things, not just this cap and trade money. So I'm well over, but thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Colleen Callahan. I'm Deputy Director of the Luskin Center for Innovation, based at the University of California, Los Angeles. More importantly, you probably all know me as the very last panelist and the very last panel of the 3-day conference. So thank you so much for holding in there and sticking with us. So I also want to thank the conference organizers, including EPA and especially Charles Lee for organizing this session. All right, so I'm going to go through my slides pretty quickly in respect of your timeline. Takeaway message, if you get nothing else out, this is a major opportunity to advance climate action, and it also holds some important lessons for other states that might be interested in doing the same. We understand the world is watching what California is doing with its climate policy experiment. It's landmark, unprecedented in many ways. So let me give you a couple, kind of break down the steps a little bit further, building upon what my fellow panelists have said. So how does this money get to EJ communities? Well, it starts with the polluter paying. The polluter buys carbon credits through an auction system. The auction revenues, they go into the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. And from there, the state legislature and the governor appropriates through the annual budget process money to different state agencies. It's a lot of state agencies actually that are involved in this. So it's a fairly complex implementation process, because these state agencies are now updating their program guidelines, sometimes even creating new programs in a couple cases. And they're doing so to incorporate the requirements under SB 535 and some other important laws. And then the money goes through those state agencies to our EJ communities through programs that do what Mary Rose talked about. So these EJ priorities, transit and low-income affordable housing, connected with active transportation routes, energy efficiency in low-income homes to help households pay for it and lower their energy bills, greening our communities, creating more livable communities. This is pretty, I'll pretty much review. Just want to emphasize though that these 10% and 25% carve-outs, it's a floor, it's not a ceiling, so it's a minimum of 10% and 25%. And there's another complementary law that mandates that not only does the money go to reduce GHG emissions, as we know, but it explicitly says we should, to the extent feasible, maximize environmental, economic, and public health benefits. So I'm going to talk about these co-benefits more. Really quickly, kind of what does this mean in terms of numbers, budget numbers? Significant source of revenue, so $830 million in this fiscal year, and this is an evolving story. This is the first year of implementation. This is the first budget that we have. money going into those three main buckets that I referred to earlier: sustainable communities and clean transportation, energy efficiency and renewables, and community green and natural resources. That's what is going just in this year alone, specifically to EJ communities, disadvantaged communities. So these are not insignificant amounts going to communities that need the resources the most. This might be the largest source of revenue for EJ communities in a long time. But this is only the beginning. So in the past 2.5 years, the auction revenues have generated almost $1 billion, not quite $1 billion. Just in this one last auction alone, and there's quarterly auctions, we've produced $1 billion. So the amount generated is really, really increasing. And that is why our budgets can also increase. So the governor has proposed $1 billion in this budget, but because there's 3 more auctions, that is very likely to increase. We might generate, $2.3 billion, or perhaps even more this year alone. So what should the investments accomplish? Talked about co-benefits, environmental co-benefits. So reducing toxic pollution, criteria pollutants in EJ communities, reducing water pollution, economic benefits, creating jobs, quality jobs, as well as the quantity both should be measured, supporting local businesses, public health benefits, of course related to those environmental benefits, reducing pollution, improving the safety of our neighborhoods, making it safer to walk and to bike and to take transit. Lots of other categories of these co-benefits. Of course, we don't want to produce unintended negative consequences, and also obviously reducing GHGs. So Charles mentioned a convening that UCLA held last year with stakeholders to support the equitable implementation of SB 535 and the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. Out of that came a report that I meant to show, bring up with me, but I have copies of that report if you are interested in learning a little bit more about the opportunities and getting some recommendations from EJ leaders and other leaders on how we can implement this law in a way that will ensure we really are maximizing the benefits for communities that need it the most. And thinking, it gets a little maybe wonky, but for those who are familiar with evaluation, and maybe even I know some of you were at a conference that UCLA held several years ago to create a framework for evaluating environmental justice policies and programs that EPA and others in this room were involved in. And so you might know then the logic model approach, where we think about starting backwards. What do we want to accomplish? What impact do we want to have? And then thinking about how do we get there? What are the data that we need to collect to make sure that we're having that impact? What are the indicators that are important? All the way to what are our goals and our principles that really drive this process? Pulling from those important laws like SB 535 to really then set the stage for what we want to measure, what we want to accomplish. And so it's really about making an impact and proving that we're having an impact, so that we can defend against any threats to really important initiatives and laws like SB 535. And so I just want to quickly end with 3 examples of the impact of the programs that are going to be receiving money from the GGRF, what that impact is on real families. Here's an example of a solar program, a low-income solar program that is not only saving low-income households a lot of money, but also creating jobs, reducing GHGs, energy efficiency, also for low-income families that are creating significant amounts of good-paying career ladder jobs, and also helping households to save money on their energy bills that they can use for other important things. And making our streets, our communities more livable, and involving the youth in that, and local businesses. And with that, I want to thank you.
So I want to say that I want to apologize a little bit to the panelists, because when we first first conceived of this panel, it was for a 90-minute session. So we are thinking about other ways in which we can kind of do more sessions around this, and I'll talk to that at the very end. So let me open it up for questions.
2 questions, 2 minutes, 2 people.
222.
So one, I just want to congratulate you all on an extraordinary outcome. I remember the heat of litigation around AB 32, and then she came to this result is really remarkable. So I want to lift up APAN and the organizing and all the EJ groups. But my question is for Arsenio. Arsenio, what is it about Cal EPA that makes you all such a committed partner in this work? And can you reach out through ECOS and other entities and do some work with other state agencies like the Maryland Department of the Environment to help them get the level of understanding and depth of commitment that Cal EPA has to EJ work? Can you do something with these other states?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good question. I mean, I have been spending some time with ECOS, and I have been spending some time with other states too. I think really it gets down to, I mean, if you're going to have environmental justice positions in these state agencies, you got to pull from these communities where I'm a second generation, I come from an activist family. I think you got to start pulling from those communities. But I think a lot of states are very, very interested. We just rattled off a few. We're talking Washington, Massachusetts, Illinois, and a few other folks on these very similar issues and stuff like that. I think a lot of folks are interested but have been stuck for a while. So we spend a lot of time with other states in helping them, work through some issues. Of course, we have the ability, look, anything that passes right now in California with the environment, it's going to be with the equity lens. We have people in leadership now that aren't going to take it anymore. And so we have people that are making the decisions that anything, a typical enviro bill is going to have an equity lens on it, or it ain't making it through. And so we have leadership in place. We have this, a group of people that are now in the government that I think come from these communities that really care. So I think we're in a great position to take it even further. But we do spend a lot of time with other states talking about coronavirus being cumulative impacts, about prioritizing enforcement, targeting enforcement initiatives. If you know them and they want some help with a particular issue, we're open to that. But I don't want to talk about like in general, I don't want to talk about how to do public participation. I mean, public participation is important and those processes are important, but let's get down to it. Let's figure out a precise thing that you want to work on. We'll help you out.
Excellent. Congratulations.
Thank you.
This question is also for Arsenio. What is California doing in studying and investigating the needs of the cumulative impact on the tribal communities? Since California has the largest number of tribal governors and the largest Indian population.
Yeah, a few things. One, we recognize that, again, with this cumulative impacts tool, we are looking at pollution burden. We recognize, and we've been working with our Tribal Advisory Committee on the fact that there are certain elements of this tool that need to better incorporate some of the pollution burdens that tribes are facing. I think we pick up a lot of the socioeconomic stuff, but as it relates to, let's just use, for instance, pesticides, right? Like right now, we only use agricultural pesticides. We're not picking up all the Forest Service is here, please let me know about. But we're not picking up all the pesticides used by the Forest Service. That may impact more tribes than these other areas. But for the bottom line, I mean, so we are looking at, the mining operations and folding that in. So we're looking to better include, impacts that tribes and have in California. But it remains a work in progress. And I'll be honest, at the end of the day, some of the tribes in the Central Valley live in, areas that have very serious air pollution, but a lot of our northern tribes have pretty decent air. And so the cumulative impacts tool that I just went through, the bottom line, and we made this a strategic move on this, is we're going to score it. And there are going to be people that are showing up in the red, and those people that are showing up not showing up in the red. And so some of our northern tribes, we recognize the single impacts, they're real impacts, but at a cumulative level, they're not showing up as high in the